In Titus 2, older women are commanded to teach what is good so they can help younger women love their husbands and children. On today's show, you'll hear from older women who will share timeless, relevant biblical wisdom and personal, profound life experiences to help answer your questions and teach what God says is good so you can be the wife and mother you were created to be. Welcome to another episode of Older Women Likewise.
Good evening. We are so glad that you've joined us this evening. And we have two ladies who are joining us on a panel discussion you've seen before, but it's been a while. Sandy Bryant and Christie Estes. And we are so glad to have y'all join us this evening.
Thank you. It's nice to be here.
And so, Cindy, so where are you? We always have to catch up to where you are.
South Carolina. We drove past a lot of cotton fields today that were super beautiful, and our RV spot today with the good Wi-Fi is right next to Lake Marion. So I'm glad you're a school teacher because you were able to fill me in on the Civil War person that this lake was named after. So
Absolutely. That's one of the joys of retirement is I've been able to go around to different places that I taught about when I taught American.
Yeah.
So that's been a lot of fun. So good for you. We are glad to have you with us too this evening. It wouldn't fun without you. Tonight we are talking about greeting visitors who come to worship with us. And, it is such an important thing for us to do when we do have visitors who come to our assemblies. Some of the things that, some of the scriptures rather, that I thought of when I was working on this lesson was Hebrews 13:2 that tells us, do not forget to entertain strangers, for by so doing, some have unwittingly entertained angels. It makes it really important that we need to be sure that as people come into our service, because we don't know what their purpose is, who they are, or why they're coming, we need to be sure that we greet them very well. I like in Romans 16:1-2, where he tells the church that Phoebe is coming, and to greet her, they said, receive her in the Lord in a manner worthy of the saints. And I like that expression, in a manner worthy of the saints. And so we need to be sure that as people come into our service, that we greet them in the right way. And James 2 talks about some ways not to, I think, greet people with partiality. Many of you know that scripture, and it's verses 1-13. We won't take time to read it now, but where he says, if the wealthy person comes in, you need to treat them equally with the poor person, and the poor person is equal to the wealthy. Don't show partiality amongst people. In Matthew chapter 5, Jesus told them, he said, if you love those who love you, what reward do you have? If you greet your brethren only, what do you do more than others? And he says other parts, so it's just a bit of it. But we need to be sure that we are treating everyone fairly, and again, in the way that we would want to be treated also. So our big question is who is it that's visiting our services? What kind of people do you all find visiting the worship services where you are? Christie, what do you think?
Well, a lot of times we see Christians, who are on vacation or who are working, and they come and they'll join the assembly. And sometimes you see family members of our brethren that are in town visiting. Maybe they're Christians, maybe they're not Christians. And a lot of times we see people who come into our services who literally just saw the building and decided to come in. And those are the ones that I think we need to really reach out to and make them feel welcome. I mean, we need to make them all feel welcome, of course, but I think some of those could be more what we might call a prospect, someone that might be interested in studying the Bible.
Someone that we need to focus on in some ways. Exactly right. Cindy, do you have any more thoughts on, as you go around, you've gone around to different congregations and you've been a visitor at ones.
Yes. Yeah, there's all kinds of people that visit, and having been like a preacher's wife for 37, 38 years, there'd be all kinds. I mean, sometimes it would even be people that were coming in and were very forthright about the fact that they were kind of looking for some help specifically, and so those kinds of people often can tell you exactly, like sometimes they'll pour their heart out to you and say, my marriage is falling apart, or my child was just arrested, or they're going through some kind of life crisis and they just don't know what to do. And so they've reached a low point in their life. And so they're coming to try to find some answers. So sometimes we'll run across that.
And we can't always tell, can we, when the person walks in, exactly what's on their mind. So we have to be prepared. In preparing this lesson, I came across this Twitter poll, which I went, Twitter. But anyway, but they identified 10 things that people cite as to why they don't come back to a church, just any church. And one of them was the unfriendliness of members, that they would go in, nobody paid attention. That one of them was there was no obvious place to obtain information. I thought that was an interesting thing that we can do as we are greeting visitors. Another one was an insider church language, shorthand phrase or stories or jokes that the visitor doesn't get, and it's just obvious to the others. Members telling guests that they are in their seat or in their pew. And we have a cartoon that really shows that it's the way that it feels, when somebody says, hey, you're in my pew. I knew of that happening. People had worked really hard to get a friend or a family member to come and to worship with the church. And somebody said, you're in my seat. Could you move? And they said, the visitor said, we'll never be back again. We have to be careful of what is the thing that turns people away from visiting again. And oftentimes we'll find they don't tell us why they don't come back again. Have you found that to be true? They just don't, never mind. I don't care to. So we have to find out those things, I think, on our own. So do you find one of the things I think we see is that sometimes we greet Christians that either that we've already known or we know that are members of the church differently from visitors that are not, that are, non-believers or that are totally unknown to us. And how can we implement that visitors first, brethren second, maybe a way of doing, how can we do that so that we greet those people that we don't already know? Sandy, you got any ideas for us on what we can do?
Well, I know in some congregations it may be a little more difficult, but in our congregation, we know everybody who worships there regularly. So yes, greet them, say what you will, but don't hang out with them. Stay there and watch for the visitors to come in, especially if it's somebody from the community who may be seeking God. And, first thing we have to do is establish a common ground with them, make them feel comfortable. They've made a contact in us, and that may lead to them coming back and eventually obeying the gospel. So, I think we have to be careful to make sure that we notice the visitors. They need attention.
That's a good point. That really is, because it's so easy for us to get involved with greeting the brethren that we forget to greet visitors as well. Do you think your greeting makes any difference? Or have you ever talked to people that say, well, it doesn't really matter?
It
No,
does
most of
matter.
us think it matters, don't we? They think it makes a difference for us. But how, and Cindy, how have you had this? Have you ever gone to a large congregation? I'm picking on you because you've been going to churches around the area, and you can't tell the visitors from the members.
Well, a lot of the larger congregations that we visited have taken that into consideration. Like sometimes they're large because they've really given a lot of thought to just about every situation, and they've grown their congregations, because they've given a lot of thought. And so a lot of those bigger ones, they have name tags. As you walk in, they just hand you your name tag. And then with a visitor, they have a special tag that has a little, something on it that kind of shows you're a visitor. And that visitor often you have your own personal sort of usher. And so they're like, where's your preference? You get to sit kind of where you want to sit. So they have figured out a lot of those kinds of things. So yeah, I think individually though, if it's a visiting prospect, I love letting them know just very forthrightly, listen, if you have any questions that come up during your visit, we love to answer your questions. Invite them to really, and that puts them in the mindset of like, maybe I will think of questions, or letting them know, hey, I know our worship might be a little different. There's not much showmanship or performances around here. We're just trying to make sure that God gets all the glory, and we're trying to do things the way that the church did in the New Testament back when people were those instruments that praised God, or things like that kind of explain what they're about to experience, because it is so different. But either way, what I really appreciate, Isla, is when someone's like, hey, if you don't have any lunch plans, we'd love for you to join us so we can get to know you better. That's my favorite, because I want my time with them to be just the beginning of something. I'm there to be with them. And I know when I was a preacher's wife in Beaverton, if I knew that they were Christians coming and traveling through, sometimes I'd be like, hey, do you need any inside scoop about anything in the area? Or I'll check in with them like, do you have a place to stay? Are you all set on that? Or do you need some hospitality? We can save you some money on hotel. If you'd rather save some money and be able to do more stuff. And I personally Christie did that for me. I was a stranger to her, and she brought me and my girlfriend, and that's how I met Christie. So they're very hospitable up all in Dallas there, in the Dallas area.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Christie, what do you think y'all are particularly doing well at your congregation?
Well, one of the things our elders put in place that I think is just a really helpful in this area, because our group, we have about 200 members, and they put in a rule they call it the 5-minute rule. And so as soon as services is over, for 5 minutes, we're all to go and visit with the visitors, because, especially someone who is coming maybe and they are seeking Christ, they may feel uncomfortable. They don't know anybody. They're going to be the first ones out the door, most likely, because they're uncomfortable or, and so they put this rule into place, and it's been very helpful because, your Christian friends that you're already there with, you're going to talk to them. And sometimes you'll see somebody come up to you and say, hey, I need to talk to you. I need to give you this. I need to something. And I'll tell them, that's great. Come with me. Let's go meet these visitors. We need to go meet these visitors. So it's been a really good thing. We've kind of gotten lax in that lately, but it's really good. And, one thing I was thinking of too, is that we need to make it a personal responsibility, especially if we have a visitor sitting near us. And so if you have someone come in and sit down in front of you or behind you, that's your job to talk to them, to make them feel welcome. Because if we don't do it, who will? Because where we're at, we've got 4 rows of pews. And so if someone's on the other side of the building, I may not get over to them before they can leave. So I try to make it my job to talk to the people, especially the ones right around me.
Exactly. Those are really good ideas. Sandy, I wanted to ask you this. We know that quite often we have visitors who come in who have medical needs, and maybe they let us know about them. What do you think that the church can do, and we can do as women in the church to help people with those medical needs or special needs of whatever sort?
Well, you know, when I was in the business world, we had what was called reasonable accommodation. And if we had a person who was hard of hearing, we had to provide that special telephone for them. So I think kind of in a way, we're needing to do the same thing. If somebody's hard of hearing, like at our congregation, we have these earphones, these jacks that they can use to hear the sermon. And, you know, if they come in a wheelchair, make sure there's a place for them to sit. You know, don't clog the aisles to the point where they're not comfortable, because not everybody that comes in a wheelchair can get up and move into the pew on their own. So, you know, there are things like that. I know we visited a congregation on Sunday with our grandchildren, and when we pulled up, my granddaughter said, hardly anybody here wears a mask anymore. And because I'm a transplant patient, I said, well, I have to, so I'm going to do that. And I felt a little uncomfortable. One thing I enjoyed about COVID, if you enjoy anything, is that everybody looked like me. You know, we all wore masks, so I wasn't standing out. But they all knew my history, so it wasn't really an issue. But when we encounter somebody like that, you know, we don't need to say, oh, you don't have to wear your mask, or, you know, I hope you can hear this, you know, whatever the issue is. We need to be aware and accommodate wherever possible.
Mm-hmm.
One way of accommodating too is if you see someone who's one of the few that are wearing a mask, to have a mask around your wrist or whatever, so you can quickly put it on while you interact with them.
Right.
And when you're finished, then whatever your preference is, you can take it off. But I think that shows some respect for whatever position that they're coming to you from.
Well, you know, one thing they said about most of the masks, they protect the other person more than they protect the person wearing them. And so if you wear a mask around me, I know you're concerned about my health, that I don't pick up some kind of an infection or something like that. So, you know, it's a lot to ask. I know a lot of people don't, but I do appreciate people who either offer to wear a mask or just automatically put it on, like you said, because I feel like it protects me in the long run.
I see.
Mm-hmm. And what are some ways that, you know, James talks about don't show partiality. What are some things you've seen where people do show partiality when we have a visitors? Do we do that? Or what are some, I guess what I'm looking for, what are some negatives? What are some don't do these things? One we've seen earlier, don't ask people to leave their, you know, because it's your pew. Cindy, you had a good thought on that about your personal pew.
Oh, yeah, my idea along those lines, and I understand if you're a parent, you really need to be a toddler, especially the parent of a toddler, that there's certain pews that are more handy for you. And in some cases, you know, there can be exceptions to what I'm about to say. But like, what if you didn't have a pew? Like, what if every time you came in, you kind of sat in a different area each time? When you stand up, you're going to probably be interacting with people that you don't get as much interaction with. So I tried to make it, and I think this may have come up in a previous program, I'm not sure, but I wanted to start that new habit. So I set an alarm on my phone when I knew around the time I would start to look for a place to, like, don't go to your same. It was hard to break my habit. Like, oh, find your new place. But like, the whole idea of my pew is like a fake out. That's not for real. And you actually don't have a pew.
Yeah.
You don't have a pew.
Yeah. And that really does help a lot. Sandy?
Well, along that same line, you know, sometimes we make our pew or our seat home. It looks like we camp out there. We have a pillow there. We have a throw there. We have things in the songbook holder. You know, that also tells that visitor, don't sit here. And I think we need to not do that.
Where do visitors like to sit? would you say, Christie, when you have visitors, where do they generally end up or like to sit?
They like to sit at the back, but a lot of times there's members at the back, and the visitors sometimes have to go down towards the front, which is very uncomfortable if you're visiting. Even if you're a Christian, sometimes that's uncomfortable for me anyway. I don't like to do that. But yeah, I find them wanting to sit at the back, or they might want to sit with someone. Sometimes if we've had people visiting, especially if it's someone that I've invited, I'll ask them to sit with me, or if I've just met them and especially if they're alone, ask them, why don't you come sit with my husband and I just think that just makes them feel more comfortable.
Oh, yeah.
Just to have someone to talk to, or, latch on to.
And I see times when we show partiality when someone comes to visit in the congregation who is has been there before, maybe a former member, or someone that I know when Cindy came to visit our congregation, we were all so thrilled, because we've been watching her, but she wasn't, and I just picking on Cindy, but when someone comes and we know them, a lot of times we'll spend all our time talking to that person, and we'll really focus. And there are other visitors that we ignore, and we have to really be careful of that, I think, and to realize that it's a thing, it's an issue, and we need to be careful of it. So one of the things that I came across in preparing for this lesson was the suggestion to do a hospitality audit. And I thought that was an interesting concept. I used to do that at the school where I was principal. I would walk in as though I were a first-time parent, and am I seeing? What's going on? And if I've not seen this before, what am I seeing? Do you think a hospitality audit would be helpful in a congregation? Cindy, what do you think about that? Do you have a chance to consider that?
So tell me what you mean by hospitality audit.
Hospitality as in being hospitable to visitors as they come in. And then the audit is more like to look at it as though you've not seen it before.
Oh, I see what you mean. Yeah, look at it with fresh eyes.
Yeah, one of the Twitter old things, it says, too often there's no place to find information. And that's an interesting thing, to look at, to step into the building as though you've not been before. If you know anything about, does that seem like you could see that as something reasonable to do to help you?
Yeah, some of the things that have been so impressive, and you can go through on our website, nomadyouandi.com. We have visited about 60 congregations. And so what our habit is that when we go in, we find one thing really special that they stand out and do right. And so in the category of what you're talking about, one thing that I've noticed among some very successful congregations that have saved a lot of souls in their communities is that they will choose a theme for the year, so that when you walk through the door, you know what this church does, like what their focus is specifically this year, what part of the Bible. And so they'll have posters made or banners and this and that, and then they've chosen what the sermons are going to be. If I walked into that as a visitor, I would know exactly what's going on. So that has made a really good impression. It takes a lot of courage, you guys, to visit a congregation, like to walk in, especially if you're someone who has not gone to church your whole life, and you're there because you're looking. And these people, I think one good thing to say is, we love seeing a new face. Like it's so great to, see a new face. So what brings you our way? And so a lot of people are coming to us with heavy hearts, like I mentioned. So they want to tell you, like, here's what's going on. And so, yes, greet people, but there's two kinds of greetings to me. There's the one where it's like you can tell where even as they're saying hi, they're kind of looking and they just want to make sure that they check the box of like, you've been greeted, have a nice day. But there's this other thing of like this genuine interest where they're leaning in and they're like, tell me your story. Oh, so how did that start? And so that you're going to be with them as long as they want to be with you. That's a tricky thing too, is I guess recognize if somebody's super engaged with someone, you might want to go ahead if they're, it's kind of a judgment call. Do you also kind of get in line? You don't want to interrupt a good thing. So kind of listen in and look, look and see, would it be better if I just stayed out? Because wow, they're really clicking. One other idea I guess I'll throw out there is if you're talking to it's this young traveling nurse and she's there and oh, you got to meet somebody over here, because they did that for like, I bet. So find the people that you can tell, oh, you got to meet so and so, and then bring them over, like, honey, would you go run and get so and so, because I think they'd be really able to help each other a lot. So helping kind of be a matchmaker with the visitors of people in the congregation that they could relate to.
That's really good. Christie, could you add some other things we ought to say to visitors?
Well, I think one thing that I think is good to say is thank them for their spiritual interest, especially if we don't know them, because, there's so many people in this world who have no spiritual interest whatsoever. And I think that just gives them something they can feel good about. Like, well, I'm interested spiritually. And something along the line Cindy was talking about, what I have found when I study with people privately is that many times the visitors are the ones that are the most fruitful studies, because a lot of times they're in the building, they've come because they're seeking the truth, and whether they've come with a family member or whatever. And so we have a thing where there's a few of us we know that like to do Bible studies with people one-on-one. And so there was an incident where this woman came in and she literally just saw our building and came in, and she had fallen away years. I'm talking years. She had not been a member of the church and not had God in her life at all. She had gotten involved in a lot of things. Well, one of our brethren, one of the men, was talking to her because she was sitting near him, and he just kind of started this conversation, and she just started giving him all this information. And he said, well, would you be interested in doing a Bible study? And she said, yes, I would. He said, would you feel more comfortable studying with a woman? And she said, I really would. So he said, I want to introduce you to somebody. And he came over and got me and introduced me to this woman. And it was someone I didn't meet because I was on the other side of the building, like we were talking about a second ago.
Right.
But do I started studying with that woman, and she came back to the Lord. We studied for like a year and a half. She was very, very interested in spiritual things, and she's very faithful now. So, I think sometimes if we just say, would you like to study the Bible? Or, that sounds scary. But if we just ask that simple question, I found that really does work a lot of times. And, one of the things I like to study with people is like a Bible timeline that just really opened my eyes the first time I did it. And so I'll tell people, well, I do this study I like to do with people because it helped me so much, and I'd love to show it to you and kind of explain to them what it's going to look like, and I just think that's been helpful, just to kind of listen and hear their story, figure out where they are, and then just go ahead and ask, well, would you ever be interested in studying the Bible?
A lot of times we just neglect to ask, would you like to study? We just assume we're waiting for them to almost to beg us to study with them. And most visitors are not going to do that.
Well, and I think sometimes we think it's scary or, it's uncomfortable if we ask, but think about a visitor coming in and they're looking for the Lord, and then nobody ever asks them if they'd like to study the Bible. That might feel really weird to them.
Yeah. The righteous are as bold as a lion, right? The righteous are as bold as a lion. That's not to say we don't have a gentle and quiet spirit, but just, absence of fear. Take the chance. Take the chance. There's too much at stake, you guys, not to take the chance. Like, I offer Bible studies. It's so easy just to say, if you're ever interested, just let me know. And so giving them your contact information, which can kind of be more comfortable for them instead of asking for their contact information.
Right.
And sometimes that's routine and it's very handy, but here's my card. It's really smart to have something already printed out, you guys, and in your purse that you constantly can just be like, here's my card. If I can be of any use to you in your spiritual growth, that's kind of what I live for, to be honest,
Right.
So, yeah.
That's a really good point to bring up about contact information. Should we ask for that? do people object to giving you contact information? Sandy, do you have any thoughts about whether we ought to ask, or how much should we ask for?
There are some people out there that don't want to give any information whatsoever. They're there to observe, and they don't want to make any kind of a commitment. But we have in our congregation visitor cards that we ask from the pulpit if they would fill one out, put it in a collection plate, or give it to one of the members. And that puts the ball in their court. If they want you to know, they're going to give it to you. If they want to remain private, they won't. So I think asking them can be iffy unless you have established some type of rapport with these people. But I think what Cindy said about the cards, I know we did that at one point, and we were out of cards very quickly. But you know, with time to order more. But it's very good because, like she said, it put, you know, then it's up to them if they want to contact you, if they're more interested. You know, I just feel like we need to tread gently about asking for their personal information.
And especially these days, I think when personal information seems to be so much misused, that we need to be careful that we don't seem to be asking for too much, you know, and so as to make people uncomfortable. Any other thoughts about contact information or what we can do with it? One of the things that I read in terms of visitors was contact them 7 ways in 7 days. And I threw that out for us because I want y'all to think about it. I'd like, of course, to talk about it. The idea here was that every day for the 7 days after their visit, that somebody from the congregation contacted them in one way or another. And I think that Cindy and I were talking about it, and we were talking about it at church, Bible class Wednesday night, and they were like, that's a lot of times. You know, and it really is when you think about it. And I don't know whether I want every day, you know, somebody after. But on the other hand, we've got all that long difference. Sometimes you go to a congregation to visit and you hear nothing from them ever. And then other times, you know, so where's the balance? What do you think, Christie? How can we achieve a good balance? You know, is once a day for 7 days? Does that sound reasonable to you?
Well, I mean, that when I first thought of that, I kind of did go, wow, that's a lot, you know, but I think if you have a good rapport with the person that you've met, then maybe that's what you need to do, you know, and just kind of let them drive the bus kind of on it, and you'll get a feel for it. One of the things that we do as a congregation, we take those visitor cards that Sandy was talking about, and we'll write a card to thank them for coming or whatever. And, my husband actually, in one of the cards that he wrote, this member, and this was he was a man who had been coming with his name. He lived next to a lady in our congregation who was a member, and he and his wife came, and she'd been asking them for years to come. So in the member care, we have it called member care groups that we had, and so their name popped up. So my husband wrote them a card, and in the card he wrote, if you would ever like to have a Bible study together, let me know. Here's my phone number, and he put his contact information. Well, that man called him and he said, I would like to do a Bible study. Long story short, became a faithful Christian, and his wife became a Christian. So I think that we need to keep those doors open, and especially for those that we're looking at as prospects, just keep asking, you know, what did you think of the sermon? If they do come back, or, you know, are you learning? Do you have any questions on what we're studying? Have you been reading the Bible? I think there's lots of ways that we can reach out to them instead of just leave it hanging or not ever reaching out to them.
One thing I would love to add to your comment is, if, say, they visited and say you've made that offer to them, is like, hey, I offer this Bible class. If they're like, yes, I've been needing something like that, you don't say, well, then let's just be in touch. No, you go like, so what is your schedule? Are evenings better for you, or the mornings? Oh, evenings? Like, well, I have Tuesdays and Fridays. So is there and so kind of like put it in your phone, in your calendar, and get it rolling, right?
Yes.
Seal the deal.
Absolutely. And then maybe follow up the next day and just say, hey, it was great getting, I put this on the calendar. And that's where I think you can get that 7 days going, maybe and see. But I don't know. That's
I think those are really good ideas. Yeah, there's again, like Christie said, let the visitor drive the bus. Don't obviously somebody who's not interested or doesn't like too much of that, leave them alone. But keep the door open. Absolutely. So another and the last point I wanted to bring up was sometimes the things physically, the things that are pleasant to us are turnoffs or I can't, again, my senior moment, I can't think of another better word than that, but that are things that tell visitors, drive them away, that they don't, that's too much. Sandy, what are some things that you think maybe we do amongst ourselves that we ought not to do with visitors?
Well, we're a hugging congregation. We're a very close-knit congregation because we're fairly small. But we had a visitor from Germany at one point, her and her family. They were friends of another couple at church. And as I walked by, I heard the little girl ask the mommy, why do they keep touching me? And a lot of people are offended by that, different cultures or, just different mindsets. They don't want, especially right now with COVID, people don't want to be touched as much. And I know in my particular situation, if somebody comes up and wants to hug me and I don't know that person, it makes me very uncomfortable because I have no immune system. So, in a place where people know, they know not to do that. And, so I think we need to be careful about the touching. And I think we need to be careful about how forward we are with them too. We don't want to be pushy and appear nosy. We just want to appear friendly. And I think when people come to our congregation, especially ours, because we're all retirees, I won't say older people, but if these people have children, we need to really go out of our way to make them feel comfortable and let them know, because a lot of people are going to think, well, they're going to disturb people or they're going to do this or that. We need to let them know how much we appreciate that they bring their children to our congregation and, really provide the Bible classes and any other aid that we can in assisting these people to raise their children in a godly manner. Even though we're all older, we're experienced in all of this, so we should be able to help these people out with what they're doing. And we had a couple come just recently that had 2 boys, and they placed membership with us, but the school system didn't work out and they moved back up north. But it was so exciting to see those children in our congregation. If you hear a baby cry, to me, that's a wonderful moment to hear a little one in the congregation. So I think that's another thing we have to be very careful about and, make sure, because I have known of people to go up and say, your child is too noisy. Please keep your child quiet. Well, we don't know the situation with that child. Is that child autistic, or is there another issue, or maybe they're just not used to being in church? And we need to be supportive, not in your face and, shaking our finger at them.
Very good points. Christie, is there anything you can add to what we've said so far as we're sort of winding down the program?
The only thing I think about is, sometimes we might think it's hard to talk to visitors. Maybe we're not really people who want to just go and introduce ourselves to a stranger necessarily. And I remember an elder a long time ago told me one time, I just was saying to him, you're so good at meeting people. And I'm just so impressed with that. And he said, well, this wasn't natural for me. I had to train myself to do that. And so, most of us, it's hard. It's uncomfortable a little bit, but, one thing that we could do is maybe think some questions that we might want to ask them, to have in our mind, just, where are you from? How are you doing? What brings you to our town? Just something to kind of start the conversation. So if it's something that we're not good at right now, let's grow and keep trying to make ourselves better.
Very good. Thank you, Christie. Cindy, I always depend on you for some wrapping up comments. So are you
Well, I guess the only thing I have left that I'd like to emphasize is get into that habit. So we all have usually a closing prayer at the end of our congregation. And so the habit, remember when you hear that closing amen, that's your reminder to lift your eyes and look around. Who do you not know? But also who looks sad? Who is no one talking to right now? Who might feel the most awkward right now? Who's going through the hardest stuff right now? Find the people who need you, because that's what that time is for, is really to connect with people and share with them the love of Jesus. So yeah, lift your eyes. The fields are white unto harvest, sometimes like right within our church buildings on any given day.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And Sandy and Christie, thank you so much for joining us this evening in this discussion. And we hope and we pray that for the viewers, that this discussion will help you to be better at greeting those visitors who come to worship with you, come to your classes. Next week, we're going to talk about the power of prayer. And we're going to have, Sandy's going to be back with us next week. And then a surprise guest, because I don't know who it's going to be yet, but somebody will. We'll rope somebody into being with us next week. But we want to talk about prayer next week. So if you have questions, send them to us. We'd love to answer your questions. And we appreciate so much your comments as well. Tuesday, so that's next Thursday night, 8:00 Eastern time. And just be delighted to have you join us again. Tuesday nights, Answering Religious Error, talking about keeping your head on straight. Join the gentlemen there who are talking from the Bible about issues for all of us every day as Christians. And on Wednesday at noon, join in also with the question and answer period. Send them questions to answer, and just watch so that you can see the questions that they are learned from the Bible, that they're the ones that they're answering. So thank you again for being with us this evening, and keep on greeting those visitors. Good night.
Good night.